I'm Tyler, and this is the AntiSocial Network.
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
How? How do you manage every time to pick open a wound to a fresher hell?
Welcome to your number one source of internet oddities.
My IQ is the highest among all Reddit.
That's not saying much.
Here we host conversations with interesting people across the internet.
There's something beyond the direct physical observable world. You can't quantify, you can't put under a microscope. If you don't want to, immediately adopt a Muslim understanding of that, that's fine. You'll get there eventually.
You haven't heard of them, but I have.
It's not just witchcraft, it's nerds. You guys are nerds. My parents didn't let me read Harry Potter, not because of the demonic elements. They just didn't want me to be a nerd.
Join us every Friday for discussions on culture, entertainment, politics, religion, and whatever happens to catch our fancy that week.
I've always deemed myself an evil capitalist.
Because that's how they get you. They get in your head. They start making you ask funny questions. And before you know it, bang, you're a liberal.
I thought it was a matter of record.
Social credit deducted.
You're probably thinking this is some pretty deep stuff, and you're right.
Joining us this week is Bill Whittle, an American political commentator, the host of BillWhittle.com and several web shows on YouTube, including. Are you still doing Trifecta at this point, or has it been?
It's been called Right Angle for 7-8 years, but yeah, we do 5 of those.
I watch it all the time, and I'm like, for some reason, my brain just like went to Trifecta instead of Right Angle. But yeah, but how's it going? How are things on your end of the country?
Well, I don't live on the same end of the country that you live on. I live in California. You live in America. But things are going about as well as they could be expected for a third world gulag, I suppose.
I live in Nashville, which is basically Mecca for a lot of for your kin, so I can't really.
I think it's half of Los Angeles moved there. All of my friends are in Nashville now.
Oh man, it's annoying. I mean, I'm not a native, so I can't really take umbrage with anyone that's moving here. But I've met so many locals who are just so mad about that.
I wonder if they all realize that the people that are leaving California, at least the ones going to Nashville, are leaving because they're conservatives. I'd always thought that when Californians get into a state, they turn it more blue, but Jeremy at Daily Wire did some research that actually turns a little more red, so who knows?
That makes sense, although I definitely think there's kind of a culture shock because you get the old school Southern types bumping into the middle class people that are raising all of their property bills astronomically higher.
Yeah. I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah,
I live in a world where I'm in a studio in Sherman Oaks, and I would say 8 out of 10 people are still wearing masks in this building.
Oh goodness, Up until quite recently, I worked as a healthcare journalist, and I had to go to the hospital all the time, and they were the only people in Nashville that still made you wear a mask. But at least
that seems reasonable.
Yeah, in that circumstance, I was like, okay, I'm willing to capitulate so we don't kill the elderly in this particular circumstance.
Yeah,
but
in the hospital.
Yeah.
But I want to stop them, and every day that it goes on, I more and more want to just stop them. I just want to kind of grab them, It's like, what are you waiting for? I'm serious. It's not a rhetorical question, honestly. Are you waiting for Dr. Fauci to call you personally and tell you it's okay for you to take your mask off? I've come to realize, Tyler, really, I'm serious about this. I've come to realize that the people that are still wearing masks out there, two things. First of all, it's the liberal MAGA hat, right? That's one.
Yeah.
and the second thing is they really like having their face covered. They're just something about them. They're just kind of cowardly like that.
I guess, especially if you're still doing it at this point. I mean, I assume at this point, everyone that actually would still be wearing it is quadruple vaxxed and is more or less young and healthy. So it's insane that they're still doing that.
Dude, America could conquer California with 10 guys with ARs, and we wouldn't even have to fire them. All we'd have to do is have them over our shoulder, and they would just surrender by the millions.
Oh man, it hasn't. I've heard that quote before, and it hasn't stopped being true, and it only gets more true with time. But so I guess just to jump into things, how tell me if for anyone who's not familiar with your work, how do you describe yourself and what you do?
Well, this is like I don't know. I mean, I've been planetarium console operator. I've been a lab assistant in astronomy and in geochronology. I've been a waiter. I've been a security guard. I've been a limo driver. I've been a TV editor. I'm just a guy who can't hold down a job, and this is the latest thing that I've kind of fallen into. If I had to describe myself on an income tax form or perhaps a admission form to a re-education camp, I would put down writer. That's really what I consider myself. And
future audit recipient Bill Whittle. Yes,
that's exactly right. So I wanted to be a fighter pilot from the age of 5 when I saw the Thunderbirds, and I went to the Air Force Academy physical at 17, and I had a problem with my left eye that I didn't even know I had until I got out of the physical, and they said no flying for you. So ever since then, I've been kind of a filmmaker, and I stumbled into this. I was working as a full-time editor in LA, and in December of 2002, I just wrote a fan letter to somebody who had a blog called USS Clueless, which is a really great blog. And he said, "Can I publish this?" And I said, "Sure." And then I did something else like that, and people said, "You really need to get your own blog." So I kind of came up in that golden age of blogs, along with Steve Green and Vodka Pundit and Instapundit and all those guys. And then in 2008, I got an offer from PJTV to go there and be an editor. And one day they didn't have the on-camera talent because the guy was stuck in traffic. They said, "Does anybody here know how to read a teleprompter?" I can read. So in I went, and then I've been doing on-camera videos since then, and really at BillWhittle.com since 2014.
So and how's that gone exactly? I mean, I obviously with PJTV kind of falling apart, it was kind of a tragic end to an older era of that kind of older blogosphere. Have you what has it been like to kind of go off on your own and try to fight in that atmosphere of YouTube?
It's been tough. The success of Daily Wire and Blaze and all of these bigger organizations has been something that I've watched with just the greatest admiration. And when I say the greatest admiration, what I really mean is rage and envy. But seriously, they're doing a great job. And I've kind of managed to stay independent and just barely kind of hang on, because I have a particular vision about the best way to reach people, and that's not something that I particularly want to do as an employee.
Sure. So where are you sitting at in terms of the overall state of things? Because I remember back in 2016, you were somewhat timid on Donald Trump, and
I had my the first thing I said about Donald Trump was I really like his hat, and I didn't, and I was a number of people who didn't know how committed he was to this. He was a New York real estate guy hanging out with the Clintons and stuff. But when he became the nominee, I was fully behind him. I was a Ted Cruz fan personally, because I know Ted Cruz and I like him an awful lot. I think he's a really good man. But once he was the nominee, I got behind him all the way. And once he became president, I mean, pretty much instantly, I realized this guy is not part of this machine. And as a matter of fact, I didn't really know that there was a machine until Donald Trump became president and began to watch them, first of all, try to delegitimize 2016 and then, basically lie about his entire presidency. And then I have opinions about 2020 election too. So
I think we all do, but we aren't allowed to talk about on YouTube. But where are you at in terms of their thoughts of the overall direction? Because you've obviously spent your the entirety of the 2010s in the muck of the culture wars, trying to fight against the Obama administration and having to kind of try to foster the direction of conservatism through the Trump administration, which we've now seen turn into the Biden administration, which just seems to be just spiraling.
It's a combination of a dumpster fire and a goat rodeo. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. In terms of how I feel right now, I will tell you, and I'm going to check. I'm going to check my opinion on the website here, not my website. I've done an awful lot of studying on this idea of distributed intelligence, and it turns out that that betting pools have a far better prediction rate than polls, because polls can be slanted and betting pools have a much larger sample. Plus, most importantly, betting pools, people are putting their money on the line. So like just as much as like end of July, Republicans had according to this, they had like an 87% chance of taking the House. It went down to 65. Now it's back up to 74. And I will explain this silliness. Right now, it looks like 35% chance of taking the Senate, and 2 months ago we had a 76% chance of taking the Senate. So all of that to say that there has been a really astonishing drop in conservative support and a corresponding rise in Democrat support over the last 2 months, and I couldn't explain it. I still don't know what it is. It might have something to do with Mar-a-Lago. It might have something to do with the fact that if gas goes to $6 a gallon and then suddenly comes down to $5, people say, "Oh, wow, wonderful." I don't know what it is, but I just checked the numbers, and for the first time since checking them, they're heading back in the direction that they had been going for the last year. So all of this to say that prior to a couple months ago, I was feeling like they are going to get the shellacking of a lifetime. And again, I'm aware of the fact that people will often manipulate polls specifically to discourage people. But this really isn't a poll. People got money on this. So in any event, I personally feel that every day more and more Americans get off the liberal bus. That doesn't necessarily mean they become conservatives or Republicans. They've been so thoroughly indoctrinated that we're just horrible people. But more and more people are falling off that progressive bus as the progressive movement becomes progressively more insane on a daily basis. It just never ever ends. I think people have had enough of this, and we're going to find out in a couple months. 2 months ago, I would have said this is going to be a historic shellacking. Now I'm confident that we'll win the House, and I'm hoping that we will win the Senate. And honestly, it's been really discouraging watching those numbers, because I put a lot of confidence, as I said, in this distributed intelligence idea, and I couldn't explain it, you know. Tyler, I just couldn't figure out why there was, because these numbers were like just going like this, you know, the Republicans going down, Democrats going down, Republicans going up, and then all of a sudden, wham, like that. And the only thing I can think of that occurred around that time was the Mar-a-Lago raid. But I haven't felt those kind of repercussions throughout the culture, so I don't know. I'm not sure what it is, but I didn't like the trend lines. They look like they're improving again. And I'm hoping that's the case.
Wouldn't it correlate somewhat to the Roe v. Wade decision?
It possibly could correlate to Roe v. Wade. We didn't see a big change in the immediate aftermath. They did a bunch of polls, and some of those Republicans actually went up. But I suspect it took a while to sink in, and that's probably the most likely explanation. So I don't really know. When I look out into the pop culture, I don't see it as the kind of topic of daily conversation, you know, that I'd always believed it would be the third rail, that would be it, you know, that the liberals would just be, they just never get off of that issue. But it didn't seem to have that kind of effect. I don't get that, you know, my antenna's not being activated by constant talk about it. But on the other hand, I think you got a great point. I think that's the only thing really of major import that, you know, that happened. And so we'll see. But, you know, I don't want people to think that I come up with my opinions on things based on polls or betting results. I use these betting results to try to determine what other people are thinking and try to figure out how to get them a little closer to, you know, what appears to be objectively be the truth. Love your shirt, by the way.
Thank you. I'm sure you recognize it. Obviously, we're about a month and a half out from the midterms at this point. what do you think with everything is kind of in doubt, obviously, because there are these so many unknown factors at the moment in terms of the state of the economy and the state of abortion law and whatever the Justice Department is going to try to pull up against Trump in the next whoever knows how long. I would imagine they probably try to drag him into court in October as some sort of October surprise or something. Where do you see the direction that the party needs to be taking at this point is? Because obviously we have there's the part of that says of us that says that Trump is the direction just by right of the cultural power behind him, and that he does have this huge base. But there's also the enormous baggage that comes along with him, and the fact that centrists just absolutely despise him. And whatever you think of 2021, a lot of them showed up against him to try to vote him out. So what do you think the direction is for the Republican Party at this point?
I have a kind of a conflict between my heart and my head on this one. My head tells me that Ron DeSantis is actually executing conservative agenda with astonishing success on a daily basis. He's not only openly bringing up and criticizing these woke encroachments, he's getting legislation passed to stop it. And I don't think he irritates people as much as Donald Trump does. I think he'd be more likely to win. That's what my head tells me. My heart tells me I want Trump to win just so he can rub their noses in it. And that's not necessarily a smart political position, but that's what I feel. And especially after Mar-a-Lago, I felt like, okay, all right, fine. You know, this is how you want to play, then this is how we'll play. I don't see any world at all where DeSantis runs if Trump is running as the Republican. He'd make a fine vice presidential candidate. But yes, he's an extremely polarizing figure. And the main reason I incline towards Trump is that he seems to scare these people more than DeSantis does, and he scares them on a molecular level. And it makes you realize just how much entrenchment there is in this state. It's not even a deep state anymore. It's just a thing. This federal government's it's a $4 trillion thing that is not under anybody's control. $10 billion disappeared. It's a rounding error. $10,000 million gone. Who knows where they went? Well, just disappeared. We're going to print more money. All of this stuff is so deeply entrenched, and it's not just entrenched politically. It's entrenched in terms of this sort of cycle of civilizations things, where if you have 2 or 3 generations without hardship, you get to believe anything, no matter how stupid. And I live in the center of stupid. And so, one of the most pithy and true things I've ever heard in terms of understanding human history is strong men make good times make weak men make bad times make strong men, and around and around and around it goes. And we are right on the cusp of the weak men making bad times. So I don't know if I'm beginning to doubt that anything short of something really serious happening is going to shake these people out of their delusions. But on the other hand, I'm extremely optimistic, mostly because I see so many people, especially young people, especially gamers and people in their teens and 20s and early 30s, who are just so sick of woke politics destroying games, destroying pop culture, destroying movies, destroying TV shows. They're sick and tired of being lectured. They're not conservatives, but they hate the progressives, hate them. And so to answer your question in terms of what we should be doing, we should be going after those people. We're putting all our efforts into the people that are already in the tent. We need to go after those people, speaking the language that they speak, and convince them that we're not the monsters that they've been told that we are. And we seem really very, very, very reluctant and almost incapable of doing that.
It does seem like a good autoimmune response that you do have this large section of the young generation that's just absolutely unwilling to entertain a lot of these ideas. Again, they're not conservative, but I'm curious to the
They
degree
actually
that
are. I don't mean to interrupt you, but they actually are. One of the lightning bolt thoughts I had a couple of years ago was that the reason that so many young people play computer games is because it gives them a chance to act like conservatives. You get to kill Nazis and shoot guns and drive fast, chase hot women, and play. Red Dead Redemption 2 made $525 million in 2 days because it gave people a chance to play cowboys and Indians without getting bitched at, all the time about your white privilege and Native American, all of that stuff. They just don't care. They're sick of it, and they keep their heads down, and they just try to kind of ride it out. But they behave like conservatives. When you look at a computer game, essentially almost any computer game, really almost any one of them, you basically do two things. You make money and you buy weapons, and I like making money and buying weapons, and that's kind of the conservative credo. And so they're behaving like conservatives. They've just been so thoroughly messaged that Republicans are such repulsive people that they can't see the alternative.
Well, speaking of the cultural stuff, I know you've been trying to break into that for a long time, and you've recently opened up Stratosphere Studios. Can you kind of describe what you've got going on that front?
Yeah, I've had just a real tough couple of 5-6 weeks in terms of other last-second commitments and some crises and stuff, so I'm a little slow getting off the blocks here. But I finished a 15-minute animation called Dias for Dungeon, and it's done entirely in Unreal Engine, and it's 2 knights that are trying to find the whatever the cause of all of this desolation was, and they end up going to this castle, and there's a big circle D on the top of it, and and it looks like a computer game. It's really quite good, if I do say so myself. And I did that as a proof of concept to say that if you really want to affect the change in people, it's pointless to try to change their politics, because their politics is based on how they feel. You need to go to that. You need to go to how they feel. It's pointless and a waste of effort and money and time to send them information that they are inclined to not want. In the age of the internet, you don't have to watch anything. You just simply skip next, click next. So I'm working on a science fiction franchise that basically tells the story of America 250 years in the future, and the founding and breaking away from this big power and stuff. And I want to do something that doesn't have the word Republican, Democrat, conservative, or liberal in it at all. I want to do something where actions are doing the talking rather than the words. So I can lecture about the Second Amendment till I'm blue in the face, and I have, and some of those videos I've seen 30, 40 million times. But the way you reach people is to show them a situation where somebody's out on the frontier or something like this, and this woman has a gun, and she's about to be attacked and murdered by these 3 guys, and she's not going to be able to outfight them, and she can't call the police, right? So the question is, does she have a right to defend her life, yes or no? And when you put it down to that, no one has a problem with it. When you show a 98-pound woman, like about to be beaten up and raped, and she pulls a gun and tells these guys to stop, and they don't stop, bang, 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 and they're down. Now you're at the heart of that particular argument, right? It's not about how many rounds in a magazine. It's not about whether we have a pistol grip or not. All this stuff is completely superfluous, and every time we get into the weeds with that, we lose our advantage. It's a moral and philosophical and ethical issue, and if we stay on those things, we win, and if we start to get into the technical details about it, we lose. So I'm not one of those guys who we don't want high capacity magazines in California is constantly trying to define the AR out of existence, and then some gunsmith somewhere in space of 15 minutes thinks of a way to outsmart these legislators have been working on it for 3 years. But you have to show people, because our lives become so comfortable and so secure and so prosperous that you can believe anything. And by taking people back to the frontier, to the essence of things, you are able to show them in an entertaining way what the reality of life is. Now, some people will say, well, that's great, but the frontier was 200 years ago, and we're never going to see that again. Well, if civilization collapses, we will see that again. And the thing that's most disturbing about this work is I go through all this, as do you, I go through all this effort and stress and just the sheer kind of revulsion of having to wade through some of the stuff that they're selling. And basically I'm doing it to protect them from them getting what they want. Because if they get what they want, they're going to regret it. They're going to regret it. And it's a weird kind of feeling. If there were ever to come a point, and you can certainly see it from where we're standing, where the rule of law essentially disappears, it's going to be the conservatives who are going to be fine. They're the ones who are armed. They're the ones who plan ahead. They're the ones who are mentally and emotionally prepared to take care of themselves. I'm doing all this work mostly so that these progressives don't have to, eat rats over burning tires in the streets of San Francisco. Problem is that they take us with them, So
I think they're going to do that regardless of whether or not you want to.
Yeah, they're getting pretty close. and just to give you an idea of how completely clueless our politicians are, the governor race in California a couple of years ago, it might have been 18, I'm not sure when it was, 18 or 20, but during the governor's race, I saw the Republican candidate, and I saw him up close. I was like in the front row at a fundraiser thing, and I thought, this guy comes off like a used car salesman to me. I don't believe a word he's saying, and I don't believe he believes a word he's saying. But if it had been me running against Gavin Newsom, every single event that I would have done, at every event, I would have started by saying, great to be here. Thanks for having me. Excuse me one second. I just want to check something. I've got an app here. There's one of many that shows you where the highest concentrations of human feces and drug needles are in Gavin Newsom's San Francisco. And I'm just trying to figure out which route Mr. Newsom will be taking to go home so that he doesn't have to walk through the human filth that he's responsible for. So here's the app, and you might want to download it if you ever visit his city, because this is what he's turned the most beautiful city in America into, and this is what he wants to turn our state into. So it looks like he's probably clear as long as he avoids this area, because the human feces on the street here is particularly bad, as you can see. Anyway, great to be here, and so let's talk about what we're going to do to save California, and that kind of thing would have destroyed him, but we don't know how to do that, or we're not willing to, which is worse.
Yeah, my girlfriend lives in Fresno, so I hear a lot of the horror stories just firsthand about just how bad things are, and she's always saying how they've basically diverted all the water out of the Central Valley, and they can barely keep their grass from dying just because of how little Newsom actually wants to give water to the plebs. So
you know why? You know why Newsom has killed agriculture in the Central Valley of California by cutting off the water? Because farmers vote Republican, that's why.
Yeah.
And if it means he has to destroy the economy of this, means he has to put hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of lives into utter despair and turmoil and suicides and all the rest of it, he doesn't care. I don't listen to a lot of other commentators. I really just don't. I don't have the time, and I don't want to be overly influenced them. So I cannot honestly remember if it was Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson. But they were talking about New Orleans and how the number one crime in New Orleans now is carjacking. And he was saying it's in essence, the essence of civilization is the ability to travel safely, right? If you don't have the rule of law, then you have highwaymen, you have people who wait outside the city, and then they just jump on you from the bushes and the trees, and they take your money or they kill you or not. He was talking about this case of a carjacking in New Orleans where this woman was grabbed out of her car by the 16-year-old guy, and she was heavily traumatized and injured. And then when this kid got caught and went to trial, the mayor of New Orleans came down to the courthouse and testified on behalf of this kid. And this woman said, what am I supposed to do with this, right? What am I supposed to do with this? And the point that, again, I can't remember if it was Hannity or Tucker, but it was a brilliant point. They said, you wonder why somebody would do something like this, how somebody could be that clueless. And then you begin to realize, no, this is a strategy. It's a strategy. The way I stay in power is to chase out all the people who would conceivably vote against me. Yeah, but you're destroying your city. I may be destroying the city, but I'm not destroying myself. I'm the mayor. I get to live this life of luxury, and I get to travel on private jets, and I get to have limousines, and who cares? And I think looking at Newsom and looking at what Newsom does, my Uber theory on this, Tyler, is that this defective gene in the human gene pool that makes people want to become aristocrats was suppressed by the invention of the United States, but never really went away. And so when you ask yourself, why does Gavin Newsom have human feces in the streets of San Francisco? I've come to the conclusion that what Newsom wants is, he wants the biggest gap between him and the plebes as possible. In other words, if everybody lives in a clean, spotless city and has nice cars and is doing well, then what's the point of being the mayor, right? I mean, you might as well just be a regular Joe. I actually genuinely believe that the emotional driver of this is to elevate them above the herd, which is what they consider us. And if that means pushing the herd down, then that's what they'll do. And
I'm imagining the scene from Monty Python of King Arthur moving through the city covered in crap, and he's just like, well, I think that guy's the king. How can you tell? He doesn't have crap all over him.
So, honestly, I really think that's really what really drives it, because frankly, I can't think of another explanation.
Well, I think you said it best a couple of years back when you said they just want to rule over ruins rather than, let themselves lose all their power.
Yeah, they'd rather rule over ruins than share power in paradise. And let me know who that reminds you of, by the way. Ultimately, when you get right down to it, this whole thing is driven by pride and ego. And that's essentially, regardless what your personal religious beliefs are, allegorically, that's exactly what Satan was he was the lieutenant of heaven, right? And he didn't want to be second fiddle in heaven. He'd rather rule in hell. And that's what the whole story of the fall is about, is pride, right? This selfishness and narcissism, the sense that I must be above everybody else no matter what. And more comfortable life gets for everybody, the more these proto-aristocrats need to show how much better they are. And now you get into the whole reason for virtue signaling and trans athletes and all the rest of this stuff, right? I've got to show everybody how much smarter I am and how much better I am, because they're fundamentally insecure cowards, and they have to do something about it. And the operating consistent point is, they want to do something about it that doesn't cost them anything. They want to look smart and they want to look virtuous, but they don't want it to cost them anything, because they're lazy and they're scared. So when you hear them say we should have open borders, how dare you, racist, you racists in Arizona and Texas, all you redneck racists, who do you think you are? Well, once they start shipping these people to Chicago and New York and making them actually experience what other people are experiencing, now it's not virtue signaling anymore. Now it's virtue, right? If you claim you're a sanctuary city, doesn't cost you anything to say that, makes you feel good, great. Now we're going to give you 100,000 immigrants in your nice neighborhoods. Now your attitude about having open borders is costing you something. So if you still believe that, now you're dealing with a form of virtue. But they're freaking out, right? The mayors of Chicago and New York are freaking out. And this sending immigrants to New York and Chicago is the most brilliant thing I've seen the Republicans do in my lifetime, ever. Because it's a twofer, right? I mean, it's like saying, okay, you think we're really cruel and we just want to send these kids back in the river to drown? No, we won't send them in to drown. You want to let them in? We'll let them in. The federal government says I can't protect my state border. Okay, fine. But you guys have claimed that you're sanctuary cities, so here you go. And now the virtue signaling isn't free anymore. And what you find when it isn't free is you find these people running for the hills. And you find this same sort of thing with Antifa. When people stand up to Antifa, they're real tough guys and they're wearing their black, they're black and they're red, but they're they're anti-fascist because they wear black and red colors and black jack boots and, but when people actually stand up to them, like, I don't know, it was a year or two ago, right? When one of these Antifa leaders got arrested, he just ended up in a ball on the ground crying, All right. SEAL team guys don't cry.
Well, I guess without much of a clear transition. Well, I guess the transition would be the tactlessness of our elites. But I would be amiss if we didn't talk about the current state of the Artemis program, given your given your long-term proclivity towards space travel in
Sure.
general, fascination in general. So obviously that entire program has been mired in just years and years of delays and outstanding debt, to the point where the launch cost for Artemis is something like 100 times, or like nearly 100 times higher than the Falcon 9 at the moment, or something.
Yeah, and climbing. It's $4.5 billion for this first launch.
Yeah,
$4.5 million.
Yeah, I did a story for Leaders Media just recently on the numbers, and the number I found was that it cost $65 million to launch a Falcon 9 SpaceX rocket. So whatever that math adds up to is just how much waste the government is currently spending on an out of date rocket. But I guess I should hand the ball into your court. What is your thought on the state of the moon, the current moon landing program that they have?
Well, I think the first Artemis mission is supposed to send their capsule unmanned out to the moon, several lunar orbits, and come back. 3 years ago, Elon Musk said he would be doing that by 2022. It is 2022, and the reason he's not doing it is because the FAA and NASA have tied his hands with all of these regulatory things. He hasn't flown a Starship in a year and a half, not because he's not ready, but because the government is intentionally tying his hands. The job of the FAA and NASA is to prevent people from getting into space, unless they're NASA. So just so everybody's clear on this, for the first half of my life, I had that NASA vector tattooed on the inside of my skin. You know, I mean, I was the NASA guy, and I did a series on Apollo 11, and I just worshiped that organization. But that was back when they were engineers and pilots, and now they're bureaucrats and managers. And after the Challenger and the Columbia disaster, I really began to change my mind. Not because these things blew up or failed, but because they knew in advance that they were going to blow up and fail. I am realistic enough about aviation and aerospace to know that this is difficult business, and you don't know what you don't know until you find out. But on the Challenger, they had burned through on the O-rings several times before that catastrophe, and on the Columbia, they had foam striking the wings and the tiles several times before that happened. Well, it didn't kill us this time. Probably won't kill us next time. That attitude is where NASA has been since, 86. So as far as SLS, or the Senate Launch System, goes, much like the Space Shuttle, it is a series of ongoing budget compromises, and I will give Boeing that. The original Space Shuttle plan, by the way, was going to be an orbiter that sat on top of a large flying plane. The sales pitch was it would take off from any large airport. You launch from Los Angeles, Miami International, you launch it out of Nashville, whatever you want to do. Climb to altitude, up would go the orbiter, and then this thing would come back and land, and it would all be reusable, and then that was the plan. And then they cut the budget, and they cut the budget, and cut the budget, and cut the budget. So now we had to have an external tank. Now we had the solid rocket boosters. Now we don't have anything like what we originally planned. We got the lowest common denominator, and that's what SLS is. But SLS is uniquely stupid in a lot of ways. First of all, when you look at SLS sitting on the pad, it looks old-fashioned. It looks like the Space Shuttle, because that's basically what it is. They've taken the SRBs, the solid rocket boosters, and the external tank, and they're running hydrogen, which is a terribly difficult fuel to use. And the most astonishing thing about SLS is they are using Space Shuttle engines. Put aside the fact that those engines are 50 years old, right? Put that aside. Those engines were designed to be reusable on the Space Shuttle, and they are going to put them on a disposable rocket. So I don't know how many Space Shuttle engines they have in inventory, but we had 4 orbiters flying, 3 on each, so that's 12. So let's say they had 25, 30 maybe, right? So their entire mission plan is to take a limited series of engines and chuck them into Atlantic Ocean. That's assuming that the thing ever gets off the pad. And I got to tell you, I don't think it's going to fly. I really am pretty convinced it's never going to fly, because of how it's managed and what it is, and because the things that have been sending it back to the vehicle assembly building are not cutting edge things. These are things that we got solved 60, 70 years ago, right? Fuel line, you got a problem with the fuel line? Really? Okay, all right. But the main thing, Tyler, is that I grew up in the era of big dumb rockets. I mean, the Saturn V is, 365 feet tall, and just the tiniest little part comes back from the moon, and then that goes in a museum. But since then, SpaceX has so much changed the whole paradigm that the idea of a disposable rocket now, which is what all rockets were to me growing up, now the idea of throwing a rocket away into the ocean just seems criminal and stupid. And so this whole thing is using outdated technology. It's using outdated engines. It's being flown by the government and Boeing, neither of which are particularly agile organizations anymore. And I think it's an absolute utter catastrophe. When you think about the first launch is $4.5 billion. I think probably Artemis. I can't decide whether to spell it Artemis, M-I-S-S, or Artemis, M-E-S-S. It's either a miss or a mess. I don't know which. But in any event, this program never should have happened. NASA should not be in the manned spaceflight business. NASA still does unmanned probes very, very well. But to have NASA be responsible for manned spaceflight would be like the FAA being an airline, right? I mean, that's the equivalent. If the FAA was the nation's airline, we'd still be flying from Los Angeles to New York in wooden airplanes with propellers, flying at 8,000 feet, taking 18 hours to get there, and the seats would cost $6,000 each. That's what we would be doing if the government were running aviation instead of just regulating it. So, look, it's a hard thing for me to say given how much respect and love I had for NASA in the early days. But I don't know whether it will fly or not. But I don't want it to fly, because if it does, then it will just be another money sink. It take more money, but more than anything, if SLS flies, then NASA will do what they can to slow down the people that really know how to do it, namely Elon Musk and SpaceX, because this is their bird, right? So what you've got is the people who are making the regulations, environmental impact regulations and so on, they have a dog in this fight, and their dog is called the Space Launch System. And so when they look at how fast Elon Musk is moving, they say, well, he's making us look like idiots. So instead of just backing out gracefully, no government program's ever done that, they're gonna shackle SpaceX, and they're gonna tie him up with all this red tape until their piece of crap can catch up. And so I don't want it to be on the table anymore. I want it off the table. I want everybody to realize that it's been an absolute boondoggle. It's been a catastrophe of design. It's been a catastrophe of execution. It's insanely expensive and insanely obsolete. And the fact that we're even talking about it is shocking. Now, just to give you an interesting background on this phenomenon, about 100 years ago, Great Britain was looking at the same thing. They'd seen after World War I, they'd seen the success of the Zeppelins. This is before the Hindenburg blew up. So the government of Great Britain says, well, we need airships. We need these giant dirigibles. Okay. So what they did was they decided to do two airships called R100 and R101, same exact design. R100 was going to be built by the government, and the government was going to pay for anything they needed. R101 was given to a group of private investors who had a lot less money. And so you had a government airship and you had a privately built airship, same design. Well, the privately built airship got off the ground early, outperformed the specs, and was in service until they pulled them. Everything was just probably the most successful dirigible ever. The government run and designed airship was so heavy that they could barely get the thing off the ground. And finally, the public pressure was so great that they said, well, we're going to fly to India from Great Britain in the government airship. So they took off from Southampton or whatever, managed to make it across the English Channel, and they crashed in France into a hill that was a hill because the thing was too heavy to climb. And that's not a coincidence. You can look back and find many cases where anything that's subsidized by the government fails because there's endless money and endless time. And when you're spending other people's money, you don't care about value and you don't care about how fast it's delivered. It's not your money. In fact, since you're making money by building this thing, is a pretty compelling reason to never finish it. And this is the dynamic that we're up against here. So I would just like it off the table. I'd love it if we could get a refund for it, but we can't. Even if it flies, it is way out of date, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows. The death of SLS was when Falcon Heavy launched, and I saw the two boosters on the side coming down and landing simultaneously at Cape Kennedy. That was the most amazing thing I've seen since the moon landing. When I saw those two boosters come down and unfold their legs and land right smack in the middle of those landing targets, I said, we're in a whole new world now. And to be going back to this expensive, disposable, stupid, badly engineered, obsolete system is enough to make a grown man cry.
I was trying to suss out what the exact purpose of trying to do a moon landing mission at this particular moment is, because obviously there's been so little. It's been very hard to kind of drum up the interest for the past 40 years after the Apollo program folded. But it just sounds like that the entire purpose of this program is just to fill a bottom line and make it so that the government has something to show for itself. I mean, other than up until quite recently, NASA seemed perfectly fine, willing to pay Elon Musk to rent their rockets and use those. But I don't know what the pressure all of a sudden is. Obviously there's still part of me that's very happy that we're likely to see a moon landing sometime in the next decade before the Chinese get there, which, that's a minor benefit. But if the
Chinese get there tomorrow, we still beat them by 50 freaking years. So
yeah.
Yes, I'm with you. I'm with you. I want to be back there before they get there. Yes, absolutely.
It's a small consolation in just to have us be there before they are, even if it takes 15 years and $50 billion that could have gone into literally anything better. But do you find that there's some excitement still in that realization that you will live to see more Americans on the moon?
Yes, and I find myself rather shocked at using this word, but this new space program has to be sustainable, right? In other words, the Apollo program was, let's take all the money we have at something, throw whatever money we have and get our very best people on it, and it's about a statement. We're going to plant a flag to show that the capitalist system is superior to the communist system. We're going to beat the Russians to the moon. That's what the Apollo program was all about. And it says a lot about America, and not all of it bad, that the reason they were not only funded but built. We ended Apollo program with Apollo 17, but there was an Apollo 18, 19, and 20 that were going to go to really exotic places on the moon, and the government just cut their funding, just said, we've been. So basically, we're the country that got bored with going to the moon. That's essentially what happened. But none of that is cost effective. And so on some level, that's kind of like Lindbergh flying the Spirit of St. Louis across the Atlantic. Yes, it's important to see that it can be done, but you can't make any money if all you've got is the Spirit of St. Louis, right? You can't make money if you're carrying a passenger squeezed into this thing. It's got to be based on an economic model. And the economic model for space is overwhelming. There's an asteroid out there that's made mostly out of platinum. It's worth, I think, $17 trillion or something like that. Okay, that's pretty serious money. So this whole thing is got to make sense. And when I started doing the TV shows at PJTV, and this would have been about 2009 or 10, I guess, I got a chance to interview an actual astronaut at NASA. This is way before I lost complete faith in NASA. And he had been to the space station a couple times. And I said to him, now I'm old enough to remember when the space station was sold to us, that the space station would be used to assemble vehicles in orbit and then use them to go and explore the solar system. Because if you want to go to Mars or Jupiter even, 98% of the total energy needed for that journey is just to get into Earth orbit. Once you're in Earth orbit, you're good to go. So the space station was supposed to be a place where we could assemble fairly light vehicles and knock out into the solar system. I said, why isn't that happening? He said, oh, well, because we had to change the orbit of the space station. What do you mean? We said, well, we're now in we're now in a 42 degree inclination orbit. So the orbit of the space station is at an angle. Everything in the solar system is more or less on a plane called the ecliptic. And this thing was supposed to be on that same plane, so you send it out. So when you get this kind of angle, now you don't have the energy to get it back down on the plane. It becomes useless. And I said, well, why did that happen? Why the hell did we take this thing out of the orbit it was supposed to be in and put it in an orbit that makes it useless? And he didn't much like that question, but basically said, well, because if we didn't move that orbit, then the Russians couldn't have gotten to it because they're launching from a much further north location than we do. I said, make sure I understand this. In order to build the space station, you had to make it useless. I mean, that's really basically it. And he wasn't happy about that. And I wasn't happy to have to ask. You ask people, well, why do we have the space shuttle? Well, we have the space shuttle, we get to the space station. Okay, why do we have the space station? Well, it's a place for the shuttle to dock. Right? This kind of thing we have a standing army of people that get paychecks from the government, and there's an enormous amount of money spent. So all of the representatives and senators are voting for this stuff because it brings a lot of pork money into their districts. And I thought, okay, this is it, you know. And then along comes Elon Musk, who's spending his own money, so he wants value, right? It's his money, so it's not a question of throw money at it until it sticks. No, I want it done on budget. I want it done on time, and I want some people, thinking about things. My understanding is, he's depending on the day of the week, he or Bezos are the richest man in the world, and Bezos and Musk hadn't been in that club until 2-3 years ago. There was a period at the beginning of SpaceX when they were starting on the very first Falcon rocket, the Falcon 1, and my understanding was they were one launch failure away from Musk being bankrupt. In other words, if this one doesn't fly, we're pretty much done. But it did. So everything he's done has had an economic model behind it. Starlink, one of the reasons he developed the Falcon rocket and made it so cheap and so reliable is that so you could put up these thousands of microsatellites that now give everybody like super high-speed internet access anywhere in the world. So now essentially Elon Musk is the world's internet service provider. So that means he's worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. That's how space exploration is going to have to go. And that's why if I had a choice of either a moon base or a Mars mission, I'd take the moon base in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. Because going to Mars, one time planting a flag is, okay. If you go put a base on the moon, now you can really make money. And that's ultimately what's going to make spaceflight happen or not, is can you make money there? Because if not, Tyler, we wouldn't have any airlines if airlines didn't make money. They're on a very thin margin, and some of them go out of business. But if it turned out that air travel was so expensive that the only way to do it was to lose money, we wouldn't have air travel. So it's got to be essentially cost effective, and Musk has a vision that is as big as the goal. I've been thinking about Mars missions since I was 6, and Musk was the one who pointed out that you need 10, I can't remember if it's 5 or 10, let's go with a safer number. You need 5,000 launches to get a Mars colony on its feet. 5,000. I would have said maybe 10, right? 5,000. And so he's building a facility to do 5,000 launches. He's talking about catching a rocket on the way down. It just flew the thing this morning, right? Or caught it, put it on the pad. We got another upper stage ready. Crank it on top, fill it full of some fuel, turn it around in 3 hours. Now that's commercial aviation timetables. And just the vision of that is the only thing that's given me hope as far as space exploration is concerned. I was sure that I would never see anything like this, and I frankly didn't know if we would again. I am relatively convinced that whether SLS launches or not, I don't think they will ever fly humans. I don't think NASA's going to fly humans ever again under the NASA banner.
Or if it does, it's gonna launch one four-man mission, and they'll get to take the pride of having the first woman on the moon or the first person of color on the moon, which is like their only selling point at the moment.
That's it. That's my point. That's why I know it's going to fail. Why are you doing this? Are you going to put up a base of it? Well, we think it's time for the first woman and the first person of color to be on the moon. Well, that's not an objective. That's not an engineering objective. In fact, it's an immoral objective. What you should be saying is our goal is to put the best people we can find on the moon. If those people are women or black people, fantastic. That's great. But to make the whole thing essentially an affirmative action program, is essentially what they've become. And I don't have any patience for that kind of stuff anymore. And that's how you end up getting people killed, is when you start doing things like this for publicity, then you're in trouble. Challenger blew up because they launched it not only on the coldest day ever for a shuttle launch, an extremely cold day in Florida, because I was living in Florida at the time, but they also launched it during the highest winds. That's why the trail of the SRBs after it exploded is so erratic, because they were taking tremendous turbulence up there. The reason they did it was because they had the first teacher in space, right? So they had this public relations thing, and all the public relations pressure, and all the networks are saying, well, we got a team down there. You guys gonna? Well, we're gonna. So now they're not engineers anymore. Now they're PR specialists. And well, I don't like launching in this cold. Well, we can't delay again. We've delayed so many times it looks bad. Now, it doesn't look as bad as watching that thing blow up, but apparently. They got away with it before, so they thought I'd get away with it again.
I guess to close, in light of, the uncertainty of things and the soft Cold War between NASA and people who actually know what they're doing, are you optimistic at the moment about the near future, or how do you feel about things in general?
Here's the great paradox of my life. When I really became aware of things when I was 7, 8 years old and really started to get into space flight and wanted to be an astronaut, and didn't just want to be an astronaut. I spent 8 years training to be an astronaut. I took it really seriously. The first half of my life, we had very limited technology, but we had a tremendous amount of will, and we had a tremendous amount of human resources. Second half of my life, we've seen technological miracles, and the human factor has gotten worse and worse and worse. The smartphone changed the world, and one of the many things it did was it made us all stupider. I don't know what my wife's phone number is anymore. I don't know it. I just know what button to push. I could probably guess it, but all of these things that we used to have memorized, we don't anymore, and it's not just the memory. It's like, if we had the technology that we have now back in the 60s, the whole solar system would just be completely colonized by now. So yes, I'm optimistic. Yes, I'm optimistic mostly because of SpaceX. And the reason I'm optimistic because of SpaceX is because one person owns it and makes the decisions. Boeing was originally named after a guy named Boeing. Hughes Aircraft was named after Howard Hughes. Clyde Cessna started the Cessna Company. McDonnell, Douglas, Rockwell, all of these things were individual companies made by people in the golden age of aviation in the 50s and 60s. We don't fly any faster now than we did when the 707 came out, and that was 65 years ago. So Boeing now is now an enormous conglomerate of managers, board members, government advisors, former government people, and it's not going to do anything. But if one guy has got the vision and the money and he's writing his own checks, then nothing is impossible. And that seems to be what's happening. So, good for him. I don't believe he's the conservative savior that some people think. I just think he's the tech billionaire that I distrust the least.
That's a fair qualification. And I do think that we are in a particular moment where there's lots of opportunities for anyone who has any sort of vision to just take all the technology and go off on their own and just create something new. I mean, that's what YouTube is. It's tens of millions of people who just have this incredible ability to create something new, and then suddenly millions of people notice it, and it's making some sort of change.
It's all I watch.
Yeah,
that's all I watch.
Yeah, and not to end on too sappy of a note, but I will say that that's definitely been the case for you. I mean, I think I found your videos back in 2013, right when I was on the cusp of kind of deciding whether I wanted to be a conservative or a liberal, and you kind of pushed me in that direction. So, you know, if there's
another life saved.
yeah, you can chop one on the list, but I think that we are in a position where there's a lot of opportunity. So, you know, optimism is good. Optimism feels good right now.
Yes, and furthermore, and for my close, I'll say this to people who are conservatives, or not even conservatives, just people who have some sense of reality. I am 100% convinced that so much of what we are seeing going on out there, the primary motivation is to generate despair. That's what it's about. It's to generate despair. When you see how inverted these things are, and Joe Biden gets out and calls, Trump supporters traitors and people who don't believe in the rule of law and violence and, and street protests, that's designed to generate despair. And it works. It generates a ton of despair. It just, on a daily basis, I just have to wade through this. But the thing that pulls me out of it the most is I am not willing to become a victim of their propaganda campaign. And once you realize that that's their goal, that suddenly gives you a real kick in the butt in terms of like, you know what, I'm not going to do this for you. I'm purposely going to be optimistic today just to screw you guys and all this stuff that you're trying to accomplish. So yeah, happy people do happy things and they live happy lives. And I've never met a progressive who is happy, and I cannot imagine a social justice warrior ever being happy about anything, ever. I've never seen them smile, ever. Have you?
I've met things that look like an approximate smile, but it's, it comes with that little qualifier, the asterisk.
Yeah.
All right. Where can people find you, and what would you like people to, if people want to search you out, what would you like them to find?
Pretty much everything I put at billwhittle.com. Post all the videos there. I have Bill Whittle channel on YouTube where my political stuff goes. And I'm just now starting a second channel called Stratosphere Studios, also on YouTube, which is going to be dealing with all the pop culture stuff and CG animation and all that other stuff.
Very nice. Go give him a follow. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, pal. Good to see you.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions and cultural review podcast. Editing, hosting, and producing are by Tyler Hummel, art by Crystal Cali, and original music is composed by Guap Squad Gang and Melissa Lafira. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below and tell us anyone you think would be a good guest for the show. Thank you for listening.